Don't be discouraged by the impossibility of dispelling darkness in the world with your one little candle. Just light it. Step forward and let it shine with every step you take to help others. And so I'll move my candle aside and talk about our wonderful speaker today. Bill Isaeff has lived in Reno since 1957, graduate of Reno High School, the University of Nevada, and the George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. As a government attorney for 30 years, he served both at the state and local levels. He started his career as a law clerk to Judge Grant Bowen before joining the Nevada Attorney General's office, where he served for nearly 17 years, including the last 6 when he was Chief Deputy Attorney General, overseeing a staff of 75 lawyers and 50 staff. Bill left the AG's office to become Chief Deputy City Attorney for Environmental Affairs in Reno and later Deputy City Manager for the City of Sparks. Bill is a retired environmental attorney. He spent the last 13 years of his career working for Reno and Sparks in the areas of water and wastewater law. Bill was a key player in the creation and approval of the Water Conservation Agreement of 1994 and the Water Quality Settlement Agreement of 1996. In 2000 and 2001, Bill led a team of local government professionals and consultants in the purchase of the water supply business of Sierra Pacific Power Company and the subsequent establishment of the Truckee Meadows Water Authority. Following his retirement in November 2001, for 2 years, Bill was a producer and host of 23 educational television programs about Northern Nevada water issues and their effect on people's everyday lives. Currently, Bill is the chairman of the Griffin Santini Memorial Endowment Committee. This group raises funds to assist the UNR debate team in producing students and future leaders who excel in oral communication and logical thinking. Funds raised support scholarships, team levels, and coaching. He's also the vice president of the Great Basin Land and Water, a nonprofit organization which assists local governments and Native American tribes in purchasing Western lands and water rights. I remember we at UU called him Bill I, the water guy. And on top of all this, he's currently the sheriff, quotes, of Nevada Westerners Corral, a group that features interesting talks on Nevada history. I often attend these gatherings, and I haven't seen him arrest anyone yet. I'm so proud to know this man who's continued to work for the betterment of us all. And as you listen to his description of the ballot questions, please know that at the end of his talk, you probably won't have any idea which way he's going to vote. So Bill, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate that very kind introduction. Well, it's great to be back in the building. It's been a while since I've been here. Nice to have a live audience as well as the people on Zoom today. I hope that when the chat is over, that you have a better understanding of the ballot questions that you're going to be voting on this voting period. Early voting, by the way, starts a week from yesterday, next Saturday, and election day is November the 8th. So there are, as I say, 3 ballot questions this year that you're going to be considering. And let me just very briefly tell you how they come to get on the ballot. 2 of them, question 1 and question 2, were actually proposed by the Nevada legislature itself. And our Constitution allows that procedure. And that's the one that we most often see. But when the legislature proposes a constitutional amendment, it has to actually pass 2 different sessions, 2 successive sessions of the legislature before it goes to the public for a vote. And so that's question 1 and question 2. They both originated in the 2019 Nevada legislature and were approved a second time in 2021. putting them then on the vote this year, 2022. That then only requires a single vote of the public to approve these particular measures or not approve them, as the case may be. Question 3 got to the ballot on a different procedure. Back in the early 20th century, there was something called progressive movement. It was an idea to empower people for a more direct democracy. And so various state constitutions were amended, as was ours here in Nevada, to allow for this direct democracy procedure. And one of the things that it allows is for the people, you and me, to propose our own constitutional amendments, should we choose to do so. And we do that by circulating a petition among our fellow registered voters, and getting the required number of signatures set forth in the law. And that's what happened with question 3. The procedure is a little different than for approval. Now it's before us through the initiative petition process. When that happens, it requires 2 votes of the people to approve the constitutional amendment. So question 3 is on the ballot for the first time here in 2022. If approved by the voters at the November 8th election, it will go forward and again be on the ballot again in 2024. So you see that these different procedures, but this is how these questions came before us. And it's that way every time. So let's turn to question number 1. Let me just give you shall the Nevada Constitution be amended by adding a specific guarantee that equal rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by this state or any of its cities, counties, or other political subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. Because that's a long list there, as you can see. This is Nevada's Equal Rights Amendment, basically. And it covers more than just the Equal Rights Amendment we all may remember from the 1970s, which never got approved, by the way, which was only really related to equal rights based on sex. So this is a much broader presentation for our consideration. So let's turn to a couple of the ideas here. Equality. That's a cornerstone of our democracy, don't you agree?
Come on.
And so that's what the objective here is to allow for equality and non-discrimination on the basis of each of those categories that I just read off to you. The highest level of protection that any right or liberty can enjoy is if it's included within our state or federal constitution. And partly this is true because when you have something in the Constitution, courts will give it the highest level of scrutiny when they're interpreting that and applying it to a particular case in a particular set of facts. And so that's important. We talk about strict scrutiny, kind of intermediate scrutiny, and the third level is reasonableness. Is there a reasonable governmental purpose for this particular? But strict scrutiny, that's a high standard. So if someone's going to engage in something that's against the law and the standard is strict scrutiny, the court's going to be very, very careful in its interpretation and analysis here. Now, the proponents of this argue that this ballot measure gives clear instructions to courts and lawmakers on Nevada's commitment to protect against discrimination and advance equality for persons who are in these various classifications. Well, language is very seldom ever really clear and perfect, particularly in laws and constitutions. Oftentimes, you have to use fairly broad words to get the idea across, or to get enough people to agree to do this particular action. So here, I'm not sure I can personally agree that this gives clear direction to the courts, but it certainly does advance the idea that we want these classifications to be carefully considered whenever a case involving them should come up. Now, one of the arguments of the opponents about this is, you heard me use the word creed. You didn't hear me say religion, did you? Right. Well, the opponents say this, this kind of leaves us open here. Well, what about that? Well, of course, there are other provisions of both state and federal constitutions that relate to religion, but in this context, the proponents respond by saying the courts have consistently ruled that the word creed really means religion or religious belief or a system of religious belief. So they believe that the use of the term creed here should not be seen as any kind of an imperfection or an impediment with respect to question number one's language. What we have here is another argument of the opponents that, well, what about people's religious beliefs when they don't want to do something under this? And let me give you an example, one that actually the Supreme Court has already ruled upon. There was a case, I believe, coming out of Colorado, where a baker declined to make a cake for a same-sex couple who were about to be married under Colorado law. And the Supreme Court said that was okay. And so where are these going to go? Well, that one of the arguments is, well, gee, this very broad language in all of these categories could induce a flood of litigation, and what about how are you going to balance these things, particularly the creed or the religious one? Well, we've already seen some direction from the U.S. Supreme Court, and I suspect we're going to see more. In fact, I don't remember the exact details, but there is another case before the court right now that involves somewhat similar issues, I believe involving a transgender person or couple. So there's going to be, there's going to be probably some litigation about this, and we're going to get some direction from the courts. Now, it's going to depend on the facts of the case that comes up before the court. And it's going to depend on who's sitting on the court at the time. So, although other parts of our federal and state constitution and federal and state laws offer some protections, it is believed by the proponents here of question one that this helps fill gaps that exist perhaps in the current protection scheme for these types of things. And on question one, let me close with one that's bandied about now in the media and the newspapers, et cetera, and that's a question again brought up by the opponents of question one, and that is restrooms, locker rooms, and women's sports. Well, we're likely to get some direction on some of that from the U.S. Supreme Court too within the next year or two. The proponents of this don't believe that that's going to be a real issue. And I think that's a question that's kind of open right now. Again, as I mentioned, it might depend on how the case comes before the court, what the facts are, and it might depend who the judges are sitting on the court at the time that has to make that decision. But it does, we have had this issue raised and not really resolved yet. And I can't answer that question either right now. So that is basically my discussion of question one. Let's move on to question two. Ballot question number two. Shall the Nevada Constitution be amended effective July 1, 2024 to 1, establish the state's minimum wage that employers must pay to certain employees at the rate of $12 per hour worked, subject to any applicable increases above the $12 rate provided by federal law or enacted by the Nevada legislature. Number two, remove the existing provisions setting different rates for the minimum wage based on whether the employer offers certain health benefits to such employees. And three, remove the existing provisions for adjusting the minimum wage based on applicable increases in the cost of living. Now that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Well, let's start off by saying, what's the current law in Nevada about minimum wage? right now, as of July 1, 2022, the minimum wage in Nevada, and we use a two-tier system in our law here in Nevada, which is referenced here in the ballot question. $9.50 for employees whose employers offer certain health benefits to them, or $10.50 an hour for employees of employers who do not offer those types of benefits. So we have this bifurcated system in Nevada. Now, the current law says that will increase, each one of those two numbers will increase by 75 cents next on July 1, 2023 to 10.25 and 11.25, and then on 7/1/24 to $11 and $12. So that's the current scheme. This would change that. So let's see what we got. What this amendment does, as you notice, it says, right, first thing, that $12 will be reached by July 1, 2024, even under existing law for the one category of employees, but not for the other. So this constitutional amendment would say the minimum wage of $12 per hour must be paid to all employees, regardless of whether or not there are health benefits being provided by the employer. We won't have that two-tier system anymore under this way. It eliminates the two-tier system, as I mentioned, and just puts us all onto one basis. It eliminates the cost of living adjustment, and we have a cost of living adjustment in the current law, which says that the minimum wage in Nevada will be adjusted according to the federal CPI, which is issued every year, but it's capped at 3%. And so that means you're always running behind pretty much, unless it's been times when we were like 2 and 2.5%, et cetera. And then of course, it's only that amount. But this year, we know the cost of living well above 3%. And under existing law, the cap of 3% would kick in. So this would remove that cap completely. What it also does, of course, is remove any annual or automatic adjustments to the minimum wage, and future changes in the minimum wage would be at the discretion of the Nevada legislature. But they could not take it to less than $12 per hour because it's in the Constitution, right? You have to follow the constitutional mandate. So the legislature can and is authorized to increase in the future the minimum wage in Nevada above $12 per hour, but cannot take it below that, depending on who happens to be in charge of the legislature at the time. Now, those are kind of the pro arguments. The con arguments are the Nevada legislature already has authority to raise the minimum wage, and so we don't need that in this kind of language. Also, the elimination of the automatic cost of living increase will harm employees, they're saying, because it's going to be up to the legislature. And the legislature doesn't always come in and adjust the minimum wage every 2 years when they meet. And finally, elimination of the two-tier system may result in fewer employers offering health benefits to employees, because the argument is that, well, there's this incentive that if you offer these health benefits to your employees, you get the benefit of the lower minimum wage, right? Like $1 an hour. And so if you don't have that, well, maybe you won't offer those benefits. The pros say on question 2, that what has happened, at least in some instances, is that employers have offered health benefits to the employees, but they are either so minimal or so costly that the employees do not accept them. And so what you do is you've offered it, they're saying no, now you get to have the lower minimum wage to pay to your employees. So those are some of the arguments, both pro and con, on question number 2. And that's these are the 2 that came out of the Nevada legislature themselves. And so you get that. Question number 3. Now, this is the one that I think is generating either the most concern, confusion, or what is this thing all about? This is the question that came on the ballot through the initiative petition. That means somebody, and I'm not quite sure who, it says here in the sample ballot, rich out-of-state people. I'll take that as for what it says in the ballot, sample ballot that we all received recently. Let me just give you a quick condensation of the ballot question before we begin. Question 3, shall the Nevada Constitution be amended to allow all Nevada voters the right to participate in open primary elections, to choose candidates for the general election, in which all voters may then rank the remaining candidates by preference for the following offices: U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, state treasurer, state controller, attorney general, and members of the state legislature. That's our Senate and Assembly. That's the ballot question. You can see there are 2 parts there. 1, open primaries. 2, ranked voting. Now, maybe you've seen recently on TV an ad about question 3. A young man's talking about how people are not allowed to vote because they're not Republicans or Democrats in the primaries. Well, the ad is only talking about the one part of the question and leaving out the other part of the question. So I personally think it's a little deceptive because it makes people think that that's a separate question, but it's not. Question 3 has both of these concepts or ideas in the same question. When you vote for this, you get them both. So that's you need to decide: do you like this part of it? Do you like that? Do you like the whole thing? Whatever you're going to do. The explanation here in the sample ballot is actually so good that I'm just going to share it. This initiative and enacted changes Article 5 and Article 15 of Nevada's Constitution for congressional offices, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, state legislature, eliminating partisan primaries and establishing an open top 5 primary election and a ranked choice voting election. How is that going to work? Currently in primaries in the state of Nevada, you can only vote in the party primary if you're registered in that party. And that means that nonpartisan voters, and there are a bunch of them in Nevada, can only vote for nonpartisan races that appear on the ballot. And so, but what are the numbers? Well, what this does, of course, is that it says everyone gets to vote for all candidates for all offices in the primary election. That's the open primary concept. Right now, the current Nevada voter registration is about 1.8 million. And interestingly enough, it's divided almost equally. A few more Democrats, but about 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, and 1/3 nonpartisan here in the state of Nevada. Isn't that kind of interesting? Nonpartisan has been growing rapidly in Nevada over the last few years. So we have an open primary where everybody gets to vote. And let's use this example. In this office, whichever one it is, say it's governor, there are 7 candidates running for governor, not an unheard of situation. In the primary, everybody gets to vote, 1 vote. And the top 5 candidates, top 5 with the highest votes coming out of the primary, will all advance to the general election. Okay. So This, of course, could result, and I understand in a few places where this is already being done, in most or all of the candidates being from the same political party or no political party. So that you might have, say, of the five, maybe 4 of them will be Republicans and 1 will be a Democrat. So that's at least a possibility here in this kind of system. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not going to say. I'm not going to cover. That's for you to decide. That's for you to decide. So how does ranked voting work? Okay, now we have 5 candidates on the general election ballot for this office of governor. You get to rank them in your order of preference, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those of you who are Democrats may recall that this was actually done at the Democratic caucus back in 2020, when ranking the various Democratic candidates running for president at that time. So we've had some experience in doing this, although not in this kind of a context. But anyhow, those 5 candidates are now pushed forward, and you get to vote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you don't have to do that. You could do 1, 2, 3. Or if you don't want to do that at all, you can just vote for 1 and your vote will be counted. But if you do vote just for 1, then in the way this system works, you won't have a vote that counts in subsequent rounds if subsequent rounds of counting are required by the election results. Okay, so let's see this again. Okay, we have 5 candidates. We've ranked them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If any one of those 5 candidates has a majority of the votes, meaning more than 50%, they're elected and the thing is over. The contest is over. But let's take the situation where none of the 5 has a majority of the votes. Okay. Well, under this system, we eliminate the candidate with the fewest number of votes. And now we turn to who voted, how many people voted for this particular person as their number 2 choice, and we allocate those votes out among the remaining 4. And we count those votes. Now, do we have a candidate who has received more than 50% of the votes? Let's say we do, and the race is over. But let's say we don't. Now we go to round 3. And we do the same thing. We eliminate that 4th candidate. And now we look at the people who voted for somebody as their 3rd preference, and we allocate those votes out. I'm assuming probably by this time we're going to get that 50%. Can't be certain of that, but probably by round 3 we're going to have a winner. But that is the way it is going to do. Now, we've never done this before. One of the opponents of this say this is very complicated. It's going to be difficult for the voters to understand. Difficult for the vote counters to understand. The response to that is, well, this doesn't go into effect, assuming that it gets approved in both 2022 and 24 elections. It doesn't go into effect until the elections of 2026. And so therefore, there's enough time to educate the general voting public and all the people who are going to be election officers and encounters, et cetera, on how this system will work so that they can carry it out efficiently in the 2026 elections. So one of the ideas put forth also in favor of this proposal is that it may encourage candidates to focus on issues that matter to the majority and not just their partisan bases. And the idea is that you've got to or want to appeal to across the whole body of voters. So because you're voting in this kind of new system like this. And it's not just your base that is going to be the big supporter, or the one that's going to necessarily win you the election. Current Nevada law allows a winner to be declared in a multi-candidate race if they just have a plurality of the votes, which means they got more votes than the other candidates running against them. This system, however, requires that there be a true majority of the voters supporting this particular candidate for that particular office in order for them to win. And that again is seen by the proponents of this as a positive. Now we have not just a minority of voters picking this particular candidate, but a legal requirement that it has to be a real majority of all the people who cast votes in that particular election. So it's not surprising for me to say that the leadership of the Democratic and Republican parties do not favor this proposal. And so I'm not sure where it's going to go. It's an interesting, but this is being done. I believe New York City uses this as their voting method now, and I haven't read or heard of any great negative consequences to this, but I suspect one of the things is it may take longer to get the election results known to the public, because you have to go through this system of counting the votes once, maybe counting the votes twice, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times, who knows what the results
Bill, did
will be.
Alaska use this?
I believe Alaska also uses this. Again, I've not heard or read anything really about how it's working up there. So that's about where we are on questions 1, 2, and 3. As I say, questions 1 and 2, if approved, they will go into effect after the certification of the election by the Supreme Court in December of this year. And question 3, as I mentioned before, has to go to the ballot one more time if it's approved this time for further vote in 2024, and then it would only become effective in 2026 elections and forward from there. So I hope that I've given you something to think about as you get ready to go to the polls. Yes, Philip?
A couple questions, if I might.
Sure.
First, you had said that certain individuals, if they vote for a candidate who is left off in the subsequent rounds of counting,
Right.
This is question 3, their vote no longer counts. Can you explain that?
Well, their vote for that individual, if they have rank voted, then their second choice would count.
But if they only voted once,
But if they only vote once, then that's it. Your vote, you've only cast one vote, and you will not have any further votes of yours counted in the subsequent rounds if subsequent rounds are required to determine the election winner. So I assume the proposal encourages you to do the ranking, to either 1 through 5, or as many of the 1 through 5 as you care to rank.
just one other question on the minimum wage. Is that currently codified in our Constitution? And if not, do you think it's appropriate to codify minimum wage in our Constitution?
Well, I believe you will see, let me just pull that up here. Yes, it's in section 16 of Article 50 of the Constitution. Requires private employers to pay a minimum wage of $5.15 per hour. That's or $6.15 as in the 2-tiered system. So yes, that is in our current Constitution. Okay. And of course, subsequently, the legislature has increased those rates by legislation. But that was originally a constitutional question adopted by the voters in Nevada, I believe, maybe back about 2006, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis?
Republicans are notorious followers. They lockstep follow what their rulers tell them to do. Whereas we don't, we fight among each other. But there's a danger that their leaders could tell them, you will vote for this, this, and this. And they will. And they can sway elections that way. Again, maintain a minority group, maintain majority control. And that's one of the dangers of that system.
Bill, we have a comment.
Yes.
Chat that Oakland and San Francisco use ranked choice voting.
Okay. Okay, those are pretty substantial jurisdictions that are using this. And again, I have not heard any real news or information about whether it's working well or poorly in those jurisdictions. So I'll have to assume, with having heard nothing, that it is working reasonably well. But it is obviously a big change. It will take some time, I think, to educate voters in Nevada on how to vote the new system, and to train the people who will be conducting the elections on how to, again, respond to the new system. But as the proponents say, there's time to do so if it's not going to go into effect until 2026. So time will tell.
You'd think it would get inputted and computers would do the actual.
Well, I know that our voting machines here are, of course, electronic, but they also produce a paper trail. And so that would be, again, perhaps something that would have to be available, obviously, to make sure that those second and third rounds are being done appropriately. But I myself have confidence in the voting machines that we've been voting on now for years. And so this will, as I say, it's going to take some education on the part of everybody to be able to transition to this. But since we had, as we said, I didn't have any problem in the Democratic Party caucus back in 2020, listing my favorites in order of preference. And if I remember correctly, there may have even been a second round count there
In some cases, yes, but I'll tell you that John Edwards supporters were very upset. I was running one of the caucuses because in the second round he was eliminated and they couldn't participate. They could not re-caucus in the second round because their vote was gone.
Okay.
And that caused a lot of upset.
Okay. Nothing is without controversy.
Required
I think we have some.
that the electorate or the voters do some homework and actually study these individuals that are running, and that's not going to happen.
Well, I think you're right, Dennis. This is going to require, if you're going to rank, then you're going to have to know more about more candidates, aren't you? You're going to have to not just zero in on your favorite. If you're going to participate in this system, you're going to have to actually get information about 3, 4, 5 different people, maybe, to cast an informed vote in your order of preference there. So yeah, it probably would require more effort, homework, as you say, on the part of voters to be able to participate in a meaningful and intelligent way in this type of voting.
And you know they won't.
Dennis is being pessimistic today. I think Mary Lee has some.
Yes,
comments.
thank you, Philip. We have 2 more questions, Bill. What if many people do not choose more than the first 2 candidates and the ranked voting reaches the 3rd or 4th level? Would there be a problem with the candidates actually getting a majority/plurality of votes?
Well, if everybody, if they've only ranked, say, the first 2, with that small number of votes, they must be getting pretty close to, somebody's getting pretty close to 50%. So I would think the second round probably would satisfy that. I'd have to think about that perhaps a little bit more and get out paper and pencil, maybe actually play with it a bit. But yeah, if there are only two people in there who have been ranked, I would think that you would be probably able to get a winner on the second round. What's the other question, Mary Lee?
Okay, on three, what is the rationale for combining an open primary with the measure for ranked voting? Why not just propose an open primary?
Well, I'm not entirely sure I know the answer to that. I too would have liked to have seen this perhaps as 2 questions. I'm personally more inclined to go with the open primary concept because it is true that thousands of Nevadans are unable to participate in a great part of our political process in the elections here in Nevada because they're nonpartisans, independents, or they're in one of the minority parties that we have here. The Independent American Party and the Libertarian Party of Nevada are both recognized parties in Nevada, although they are relatively small, obviously, compared to the two major parties in their membership. Yeah, the concept, of course, is that is to open that up. Why those were put together, or do they have to be together? I'm not so sure about that, but you do have to have the idea of the 5 candidates moving forward, obviously out of the primary, but I'm not sure that the two have to be together, the open primary, but they are. I mean, that's what we're faced with. So that's the ballot question you'll have to consider. Yes, Lois.
I was wondering if there's any knowledge about who is supporting this third one.
I don't have any real information on that, other than what we've seen on TV and that one little TV ad that just showed up this past week. And
Do we know who is doing the petitions out there?
it's down, I don't know that either.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and find out if I can, who started the petition process.
And who trusts TV ads?
I thought Hickey's name came up
Bit-
as one of the followers of this.
Pardon?
Hickey.
Oh, Hickey, yeah, Pat Hickey actually helped write the arguments for this that appear in your sample ballot. You'll see that at the end there. Gives the name of the persons who wrote those arguments. And Pat Hickey, who I believe used to be a Republican, but now I think is an independent, writes his column in the newspaper every so often and what have you. And it certainly is a respected individual. So.
I have a comment and another question. And the comment is many of my Republican friends are now registered independent. This will allow them to vote. Okay. Okay. And the question is, wouldn't multiple rounds of voting lead to voter fatigue, and perhaps the quote winner may not represent the majority of all initial voters?
They're envisioning you would go back to the polls multiple times.
Yeah.
No, they won't do that.
Well, you only go to the poll one time and make your ranking, and eventually the votes counted this way will eventually produce a winner who has more than 50%, a true quote majority of those participating in that election for that office.
Well, I went online and I studied, there are several states that follow this program, but they all have modifications to it. Arizona has a pretty unique system that seems to be quite favorable for a lot of people. Texas, for example, you have no primary. When you go to vote, you go in, you don't even get a ballot. You go in and you say, I want the Democratic ballot or I want the Republican ballot. And then you do your voting. And so it's kind of interesting. Every state seems to have their own unique little method of doing this. Now, I understand that in the ranked voting, if your number 1 person didn't make it, then your number 2 vote would count towards the number 2 person, you know, type of thing. So it's kind of a rolling system there that I just think it would drive the poor people having to count the ballots go crazy.
Yes.
Perhaps Bill could clarify what a majority consists of under ranked choice.
50% plus 1.
Okay, that was easy.
There's 1 million registered, is that what you said?
Approximately 1.8 million registered voters in Nevada at this time.
Oh,
It seems like maybe the major parties, Republican and Democrat, one reason they may not like it is it may increase the number of people participating in alternative parties like Green Party and Libertarian Party and things like that.
Possible. Well, let me close with just one comment, and this is a comment from those who are in opposition to the various ballot questions we've been talking about. And it's a true statement that they're making. When you amend the Constitution of Nevada, it's not easy to change it. So they're saying if any one of these questions turns out not to be working very well for us, it's not an easy thing to change. It takes 4 years to change the Constitution in Nevada, regardless of which procedure is used. Whether it's the legislature proposing that change or the initiative petition process. So they say you don't want to clutter up your state constitution with things that perhaps best should be handled by state law, which again are easier to change. But then the opposite side of that, of course, is if it's something really important, maybe it should be in the state constitution because it is hard to change as political parties and philosophies go back and forth as different elections take place, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an argument in favor of putting it in the Constitution, as well as an argument perhaps against, including things in general. I'm not just talking about these 3 questions, but so that's something for you to think about as well. So I hope I've helped you make your choices when you go to the polls, and thank you very much for letting me do this.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Can you still hear me, or are we?
Yes, no, you're all good.
Okay, I really enjoyed this talk. Thank you so much for coming. And I do not know what the program is going to be in 2 weeks. And so you'll just have to read your newsletter and see what's interesting. Yeah, but nothing could be as interesting as this was. I have some better ideas now. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to say, I think this room is fabulous for this kind of a venue.
Yeah, it works pretty
I
well.
mean, it does my heart good to
I know.
know that this is where we began. And
And
this
we
is
continue.
perfect, it's perfect. I love it.
Good.
This will be great for all kinds of things.
That's the idea.
Yeah, thank you, Philip.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Philip and Daniel.
Worked well from here too. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jackie.
Bye.
So Philip, where's the camera and stuff? Where's?
So the camera's right here.
Oh, that's what it is.
So this is a 360 camera. So it automatically picks up as we're moving around, and particularly Bill. Now, Bill made a little challenge today because the camera doesn't necessarily have a good up angle, but when we have somebody who's seated here next to our moderator, that will probably work a lot better. It'll be full frame on that person. So that was a little bit, and I don't have a mounted camera that I can come down on Bill for. So you guys can give me some money and I can work up there. Exactly. So yeah, it was weird though. The only thing when Lois was speaking, it showed Peter, not Lois. And so that didn't work, but Marcy came on several times, and Dennis was well represented today in this pessimistic viewpoint. It is a roving camera, and one of the reasons I like it is that it does feel like you're in the room, because as people laugh or clap, you're seeing that, so it's fun.
Well, and then the people on Zoom were great. I mean,
Yeah, no,
they
you can
were
even see them up
nice
there.
people.
And we're gonna get this screen we're gonna put up there, so it's
Excellent.
even better. So
Why couldn't we actually see the other people on Zoom?
we did. I had it on speaker view, so the only people you were seeing were the people who were actually speaking. I could have it on gallery,
Oh,
but it's
okay.
always worked better on a smaller screen like that to have the one person. So, okay.
Hey,
Gotta get to
Lois,
service.
I have a blotter sitting on.
Oh,
Mary Lee, nice to see you.